My husband forgot to hang up his phone, and that single mistake changed my entire life forever. My name is Rachel Miller, and until that moment, I believed my marriage was struggling but still real, still worth fighting. For it was a quiet afternoon, our house. Unusually silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy without warning. I was folding laundry in the bedroom when I heard his voice coming faintly from the kitchen. His phone was on speaker, lying on the counter. He must have thought the call had ended, but it had not. I froze when I heard him laugh, softly, the kind of laugh he never used with me anymore. And then he said, "Sweetheart, as soon as I get the money from my father-in-law, I will divorce my wife." Those words felt like a knife sliding slowly through my chest. My hands went numb, and the clothes slipped to the floor. But I did not move. I could not breathe. I stood there listening to my husband talk about my life like it was a temporary inconvenience. He talked about millions, about waiting patiently, about how everything would be worth it soon. My knees almost gave out. But what shattered me completely was when a female voice replied, telling him she could not wait anymore. And then he said something that echoed in my skull. "She is pregnant." I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop myself from making a sound. Pregnant. My husband was planning to leave me for his mistress, and she was carrying his child while I was still trying to save a marriage he had already sold for money and lies. Tears burned my eyes, but something colder, stronger replaced the shock. I did not scream. I did not confront him. I walked quietly into the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was shaking, but her eyes were awake, clearer than they had been in years. I realized in that moment that love had blinded me, but betrayal had just given me sight. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady despite my racing heart, and I called the only person I trusted completely, my father. And when he answered, I said 3 words that would change everything. "Dad, I need you." My father did not ask questions. On the phone, he only told me to come over immediately, his voice calm but sharp, the way it always got when something serious was happening. I grabbed my keys, my bag, and left the house. Without making a sound, my husband was still in the kitchen, laughing softly, unaware that his entire plan had just collapsed. Behind him, the drive to my parents' house felt unreal, like I was watching someone else live my life. Every red light, every passing car felt distant. When I arrived, my father was already waiting at the door. He took one look at my face and knew everything. He hugged me tightly, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself to cry. I told him everything. The phone call, the money, the divorce, the pregnancy. Every word tasted bitter, but freeing. My father listened without interrupting, his jaw tight, his eyes dark. When I finished, he said something that shocked me more than the betrayal itself. "Rachel, do you know where that money is coming from?" I wiped my tears and shook my head. He sighed and told me the truth. The millions my husband was waiting for were never meant for him. They were part of a family trust, controlled by my father and released only under very specific conditions. My husband clearly did not understand. My father looked at me and said calmly, "He will never see a single dollar, not now, not ever." A strange sense of relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by anger, not just at my husband, but at myself for trusting him for so long. My father leaned forward and said, "You have 2 choices. You can confront him now, or you can let me handle this legally and make sure he regrets every decision he made." I thought about the woman on the phone, the one who called him sweetheart, the one carrying his child, and I felt something inside me harden. I stood up, wiped my face, and said, "I want to confront him, but on my terms." My father nodded, a small, proud smile forming. "Then we will do this." "Smart," he said. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer the woman folding laundry in silence. I was someone else now, someone who knew the truth and was ready to use it. That night, I returned home as if nothing had happened. Mark was sitting on the couch looking relaxed. Scrolling on his phone, he smiled at me and asked if everything was fine. And I said yes, my voice steady, my face calm, even though something inside me had completely changed. I watched him closely after that. Every small detail, every late night call, every excuse, every lie. I stopped questioning him, and instead I started listening, remembering, collecting the truth quietly. My father arranged a lawyer who guided me carefully, step by step, without Mark knowing. I was living 2 lives, one as his wife and one as a woman preparing to walk away stronger. Days later, Mark told me he had to leave town for work. I nodded and wished him luck, already knowing where he was going and who he was going to see. The woman he loved the woman who was pregnant, the woman who believed he would soon be rich. When he came back, I welcomed him home with a smile. I cooked his favorite meal, set the table, poured drinks, and waited until he was comfortable, until he felt safe. Then I placed my phone on the table and played the recording. His own voice filled the room, promising to divorce me, talking about money, talking about her. The smile disappeared from his face. His hands began to shake. He tried to explain, to lie again, but I stopped him calmly and told him my father knew everything. The money he was waiting for would never come, and the divorce papers were already prepared. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Panic, fear, regret, all at once. But it was too late. I stood up, walked away from the table, and in that moment, I knew I was finally free. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely calm. Mark barely slept. He watched me move around the house, packing a small bag, his eyes following me like he still believed he could fix this. I did not argue. I did not cry. I simply left and went back to my parents' house. My father was already waiting. He had everything prepared, the lawyer, the documents. The next steps. That same day, Mark received the official notice. The trust money was frozen permanently. His name removed, completely everything. He planned collapsed within hours. But the story did not end there, because Olivia still believed his lies. She still believed he was about to divorce me and start a new rich life with her, so I decided she deserved the truth. I asked my father to arrange a meeting. She arrived, nervous but confident, rubbing her pregnant belly. When she saw me, she looked surprised but not ashamed. She thought she had won. I calmly told her everything. The money, the trust, the recording, the divorce. Her face slowly changed, confusion turning into panic, then anger. Mark had promised her everything, a future, security, wealth, and in seconds it all vanished. She left without saying a word. That evening, Mark called me again and again, but I did not answer. Weeks passed. The divorce moved quickly without the money. He had no power, no leverage, no confidence. I watched him shrink into someone I barely recognized while I rebuilt myself quietly, steadily. Months later, I signed the final papers and walked out of the courthouse alone, but lighter than I had felt in years. I realized betrayal did not break me. It woke me up, and sometimes losing everything you believed in is exactly how you finally find yourself. Months passed, and life slowly settled into a new rhythm, one that felt unfamiliar but honest. I moved into my own place, a small apartment filled with light and quiet. Mornings I returned to work with a clarity I had never known before. People noticed the change in me, the way I spoke, the way I carried myself. I was no longer trying to hold something broken together. I was building something new from the ground up. My father checked on me, often not out of worry, but pride. And one evening, over dinner, he said something that stayed with me. You chose yourself, and that is never the wrong choice. Mark faded into the background of my life, reduced to paperwork and distant memories. Olivia never contacted me again. Later, I heard through others that she had moved back with her parents, facing reality without the promises he sold her. I did not feel satisfaction or anger, only closure. One quiet afternoon, I stood by my window watching the city move below and realized I was no longer replaying the past in my head. The pain had softened, the betrayal had lost its voice. I picked up my phone and deleted the last old photos, the last messages, not out of bitterness, but acceptance. I smiled for the first time without forcing it, because I understood something deeply now. Love that requires you to disappear is not love, and walking away was not my weakness, it was my strength. And that was the moment I knew my story was no longer about what I lost, but about everything I was finally free to become. A year later, my life looked nothing like it used to, and that was the most beautiful part of it. I had grown into my routine, mornings with coffee by the window, evenings with books, music, and silence that no longer felt lonely. I started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand myself better. Every session peeled away layers of guilt I never should have carried. I learned that trusting someone deeply is not a flaw. Staying after betrayal is not. Strength, and leaving does not mean failure. One afternoon, my phone rang, and the name on the screen surprised me. It was Mark. Wind stared at it for a long moment before answering. His voice sounded different, smaller, tired. He said he just wanted to apologize, not to ask for anything, not to fix anything, just to say he was sorry. I listened quietly, and when he finished, I said thank you and wished him well. Then I ended the call. My hands were steady, my heart calm, because his words no longer held power. over me that night I went out to dinner with. Friends' laughter filled the air, and for the first time I realized I was not the woman something terrible happened to. I was the woman who survived it and became more whole because of it later as I walked home. Under the city lights, I felt a deep sense of peace settle inside me, the kind that comes when you know you chose yourself and never looked back, and that was how my story truly ended. Not with revenge or anger, but with freedom, confidence, and a future that finally belonged to me alone. 2 years later, I stood in a place I never imagined for myself. Not because it was grand or dramatic, but because it felt earned. I had been promoted at work, trusted, respected, seen in a way I never was before. I had learned how to speak without apologizing, how to say no, without guilt, how to sit alone, and still feel complete. My relationship with my father grew deeper, not based on protection anymore, but mutual respect. He once told me, "You did the hardest thing, you walked away without becoming bitter," and I carried those words with me like armor. One afternoon, I ran into Mark by accident at a grocery store. Our eyes met for a brief second, and in that moment, I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, no curiosity. He looked like a chapter I had already closed. He nodded. Politely, I nodded back, and we went our separate ways, and that was it. No wait, no memories dragging behind me, just peace. Later that evening, I cooked dinner for myself, turned on soft music, and sat by the window watching the city lights flicker on. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who folded laundry while her life was being traded for money and lies. And I felt compassion for her, not shame, because she did not know what she was worth. Yet I smiled, realizing that pain had been my teacher, betrayal had been my turning point, and choosing myself had been my freedom. My story did not end with a new romance or a dramatic victory. It ended with something quieter, stronger self-respect, and the certainty that no one would ever have to promise me a future again, because I had already built one of my own years past. Quietly and beautifully, and life kept unfolding in ways I once thought were only meant for other people. I traveled alone, learned new cities, new routines, new versions of myself that felt strong and honest. I no longer measured my worth through someone else's eyes or promises. I built friendships that felt safe, work that felt meaningful, and mornings that felt calm. One evening, I received a message from my father simply saying, "I am proud of you," and I sat with that feeling, letting it sink in deeply, because pride earned through pain feels different. It feels permanent. Sometimes I thought about the version of myself who made that phone call years ago, shaking in a bathroom, afraid of what she had just learned. I wished I could reach back through time and tell her that the end she feared was actually the beginning. She would not only survive, she would rise without bitterness, without revenge, without losing her kindness. I understood then that closure does not always come from answers or apologies. It comes from growth and peace and choosing yourself again. And again, my story never became perfect, but it became mine, and that was more than enough. One quiet morning, I woke up before sunrise and sat by the window watching the sky slowly change colors. There was a stillness in that moment that felt earned, not given. I thought about how far I had come from the woman who once doubted her own reality to someone who trusted her instincts completely. I had learned to listen to discomfort, to respect my boundaries, to walk away without needing permission from anyone. My life was not dramatic anymore, and that was exactly what made it powerful. There were no secrets, no fear, no waiting for the other shoe to drop, just honesty with myself and peace in my choices. I realized that healing does not announce itself loudly. It arrives quietly one day. You wake up and notice you are no longer angry, no longer replaying the past, no longer explaining yourself to ghosts of people who no longer matter. I smiled softly, understanding that strength is not about surviving one big moment, but about choosing yourself in 1,000 small ones every single day. And as the sun rose fully over the city, I felt grateful, not for what I had lost, but for what I had gained, a life that was finally whole, steady, and truly my own. That afternoon, I walked through the city without a destination, just letting my feet carry me where they wanted to go. I passed familiar streets and unfamiliar corners and realized how different the world feels when you are no longer afraid of it. I stopped at a small cafe, ordered coffee, and sat alone, watching people move through their lives, laughing, rushing, dreaming, and I felt connected without needing to be part of their stories. My phone buzzed with a message from a coworker, thanking me for my support on a recent project. And I smiled because it reminded me how much I had changed from someone who gave endlessly without receiving to someone who gave with balance and self-respect. I finished my coffee slowly, enjoying the quiet certainty inside me that I was enough exactly as I was. I did not need closure from the past or validation from anyone else. My future no longer scared me because I trusted myself to handle whatever came next. As I stood up to leave, I caught my reflection in the window and saw not the woman who was betrayed, but the woman who chose herself and kept choosing herself, and that choice had become the strongest foundation of my life.